after c4, e5, g3, and now the rare continuations for black. Rare means continuations where black does not play knight c6 or knight f6. Those will be discussed in the next couple of videos. And well, it is called rare lines, but all moves combined, they're played quite frequently if you put them all together. So let's have a look, but they don't warrant separate videos, what I'm trying to say, but it's a bunch of small lines. So let's see what black can do. Let's start with the real funky ones that probably you won't face often and are not very good. h5, aggressive move. Yeah, you shouldn't take that too lightly. If you do something weird now, you will go h4 and it will be tricky. You can play h4, of course, yourself, just stop the pawn, but this is a small concession. The best move is knight f3. In these rare cases where you get h5, please play knight f3. It is a very strong move. If black now does not play e4, something like d6 let's say, then you will strike in the center and will just have a good position. This central play doesn't fit with h5 at all. So black will go e4 here to attack the knight, and now the funny idea is knight h4. Yeah, it just blocks his pawn, and the problem is that this pawn is now totally disconnected from black's camp. If black plays bishop e7, the point is that we can happily sacrifice a pawn here with the move knight c3. Now black has a hard time to keep this pawn with natural moves, something like knight f6. There's even knight to f5. But after bishop g2, black is in trouble as well. So bishop takes h4, grabbing a pawn. What is white's compensation? Yeah, white's compensation is actually quite enormous. He should just play d4. And yeah, now he has pressure against his pawn. He has gained the bishop pair. Rook g1 will be a tempo, and on top there are things like that happening. This is a pretty bad position for black. So h5 is a really bad move, but if you get it, just be happy, play knight f3 and be a lot better. Another move that is quite dubious is the move d5. White of course should take, and now black usually just captures with the queen. He can try to play some kind of reversed Smith-Morra gambit with c6, but white can really just take this and has a pretty healthy extra pawn. The Smith-Morra gambit in the Sicilian is a borderline opening where white is just about having enough compensation. With a full tempo down, white just has an advantage. Black does not have enough compensation. He doesn't even have a lead in development. So not a very serious option. Yeah, sometimes black tries this, by the way, where you can be, we can just play bishop g2 to transpose, but queen a4 will keep an extra pawn as well. Also a very weird line. Yeah, queen d5 is what is usually played, attacking the rook, so we only have knight f3. Oops, that was a misclick. I'm sorry about that. Queen d5, knight f3. Yeah, and yeah, black now has tried a couple of moves, but he will never be in good shape. Knight c6, for example, we go knight c3, and the queen will probably return to d8. Queen to a5 will lose even more time after later d3, bishop d2, a3, b4, these kind of things. So queen d8, and now just bishop g2. Here white has an improved version of the reversed dragon Sicilian. It's the same structure, but black has lost some time with the queen. White is just a bit better here. What else has black tried? He's tried e4. After knight c3, however, we see that black is in very bad shape. Yeah, looks very weird. Yeah, all those queen moves. A more interesting move is the move bishop to b4. This anticipates knight c3, so a3 is right, attacking this bishop. After bishop a5, we just go b4 and are better. So e4 is the move that is more interesting, but after the capture takes, knight c3, queen h5 and d4. White is just a lot better. Yeah, Black will probably lose even more time with the pawn, and he is down with this development, has given up the bishop pair, and the queen is running all over the place. So d5 ultimately is also a pretty bad move. Going back to the position on move 2, there are a couple of more serious alternatives here. An interesting move, not particularly great, but interesting, is the move f5, which is played, yeah, quite frequently in comparison to h5 and d5, which are really obscure. After this move, you can play just bishop g2. This is a position that we also would have in our repertoire in some way, because after c4, f5, we go g3 as well. Anyway, my recommendation is d4 in this position. It is the strongest move, attacking the e5 pawn and only giving Black a choice between two continuations that are leading to a white advantage. If Black takes the pawn, we will just recapture with the queen, and after knight c6 give this check. Here white is better. The position after this, for example, is better for white because of the clearly superior central control. What white will do is he will play like b3, bishop b2, knight h3, knight f4, and put a knight onto d5. The queen will often drop back to this. Queen e3 was played to force a somewhat awkward piece placement from Black. Here white is better. Yeah, the knight on d5 will be an extremely strong piece. Back to the position after 3d4. Most of the time Black will play e4. And here white also enjoys quite a nice position. Knight c3, just to develop. If Black now plays the move bishop b4, it is important to take care of this idea of the capture. We definitely don't want Black to take on c3 here. In a position with the double pawn, the c4 pawn will be a constant weakness. So we can play bishop d2 here. It is a good move. It is extremely good, in fact, in this particular position because it has a direct threat. If Black now doesn't pay any attention and plays knight f6, he will lose the big center pawn with this nice tactical trick. Alternatively, Black has tried knight f6 here. Knight h3, that's a good development. Yeah, the knight has a good square here. Again, bishop b4 and bishop d2. And I think white is also quite happy here. He has this threat again, so Black has to react somehow. And knight to f4 will take good control over d5. White also has f3 to attack the structure. I think he can be quite happy with the opening result. Yeah, that's the move f5. What else is possible? A couple of smaller pawn moves are possible, and not too bad, I have to say. d6, for example, is a move that is played quite a bit. My recommendation is to play knight c3 in this position. Bishop g2 is also possible, but I have a concrete idea with this particular move order. Black can play various things here. He can play g6, for example, which we will look at under the move order 2g6. The most frequent move here, once Black has started with d6, actually is the move f5. Or sometimes they play bishop e7 and then after d4 play f5. Or f5, and my recommendation now is d4. You don't have to play this, but I think it is a good move, comparable to what we've seen earlier. If Black takes, we get almost the same position, with white being better after the double fianchetto and the knight coming to f4. Most of the time they play bishop e7. This is a pretty decent idea. Yeah? After the capture and white takes, Black can recapture with the bishop and be quite okay. When I checked this with the computer, in fact that was a Stockfish engine, Stockfish pointed out an interesting idea, the move bishop h3. At first I couldn't really believe it. Yeah, what is the bishop doing on h3? But this actually has a pretty nice idea. The idea is that we should compare this to the move, oh I'm sorry, that was the wrong click. We should compare this to the move knight to f3. Here black will play e4 and this knight doesn't have a decent square to go to. Yeah, note that g5 is covered. Same as with bishop g2, knight f6, knight f3. I mean, it's somewhat better in comparison, but you still lose lots of time. Knight f3, knight g5, and the knight will have to go back. So bishop a3, what's the deal? If black plays knight f6, knight f3 is an interesting idea, because after e4, white now has knight to h4. And all of a sudden there's pressure against this pawn. Black basically has to play g6, and now the interesting move bishop h6, which prevents black from castling. Very nice actually. So bishop h3 is an interesting idea. It's not something mandatory to play. You can play also bishop g2 and then e3. Or it's a pretty flexible kind of opening. If you forget a specific like that, anything that you play will still be decent. It will never be absolutely bad. White's position is very solid and, as mentioned, very flexible. What else? To go back, there is the move g6, also quite a respectable move. This position also might arise from c4, g6, g3, e5. My recommendation is to play bishop g2. Not the only continuation, of course. Another move that makes quite some sense is the move d4. This is actually played quite frequently by people who play the fianchetto variation against the King's Indian, because it can easily transpose to that. Yeah, here black will normally play d6, and now let's imagine like knight c3, knight d7, bishop g2, bishop g7, knight f3, knight f6, castles, castles, and then we have an absolute main line of the fianchetto King's Indian. So transpositions abound. If you play the fianchetto King's Indian, d4 is not a bad move at all. Okay, I go for bishop g2, and here in this position and in the next couple of moves actually, whenever black plays or would play knight c6, we will transpose to the closed Sicilian reversed, a video that will be discussed later. Normally black doesn't play knight c6 now, but opts to be quicker with his king side, play f5 early on. Knight c6 always transposes. Yeah, this setup with e5 and f5, as mentioned, very often will come up also via 1g6. White now has an extremely wide choice of setups. The same sort of choice that he has in the closed Sicilian, where the knight is on c6 already, the closed Sicilian reversed. My recommendation is the move rook to b1, an interesting choice that wants to speed up queenside play. Something similar is of course also played in the closed Sicilian, so if you want to learn more about this position type, you can also look at the closed Sicilian from black side if you want. Okay, what else? Other moves that make perfect sense are e3 in order to play knight e2 later, or the move e4, the Botvinnik type of setup. This is something that I have played quite frequently over the years. So if you are not satisfied with rook b1 setups, there are plenty of alternatives to choose from. After rook b1, black has a principal decision. He can play the move a5, or he can decide to avoid this. Let's look at knight f6 first. b4, castles, and now knight f3. The move e3 is a bit slow after knight h5 and then f4. Knight f3 is, I think, a bit better. And now black most of the time actually plays knight c6 to transpose into the closed Sicilian reversed. As I said, something that will be discussed in a later video. If he does not want to play knight c6, he usually goes for the move h6, trying to get a quick attack going on the king side with g5, f4. Castles, g5, b5. This is a game between Hari Krishna and Ponomarev, played in Beijing 2014, where I think white had a slightly better position. But it's very complicated. King h8, bishop a3, knight d7, knight d2. Pretty typical that bishop is opened up and has really a fantastic scope on the queen side. After a6, queen b3, a couple of more moves. I think we can conclude that white is a little bit better. His play on the queen side is quicker. Still, very complicated stuff. Black might get some counterplay on the king side. In fact, in the game, Ponomarev won after being quite lucky in the proceedings. White had a much better position. This is a typical way of playing, and black, as I said, can play a5 first and get to the same kind of position with this move inserted. Let's have a look at this. a3 will be played, knight f6, b4, and we have basically the same position, just with the a file open. Again, knight c6 is possible and will transpose to the closest Sicilian reversed. h6 is the alternative, and after castles g5, black has gotten this gain of space on the king side. In the Ponomarev game there was b5, queen b3 played. I think here a good alternative is bishop b2 in order to play rook a1. This quickly trades the rooks and gets the queen onto the a file to attack the queen side. I think this position is slightly better for white with this play on the queen side. Black's pieces are still somewhat undeveloped here. It's not a big deal, but I think white is a bit more comfortable. This was the move g6, a setup that, as I said, happens quite frequently also from other move orders. Let's go back to the position here. What else is there? A move that was very transpositional is the move bishop to c5. Seen from time to time after bishop g2, black will, however, usually play very quickly a knight to c6 or a knight to f6, and this will transpose to subsequent videos. There's very little standalone value in bishop c5. A move that has very decent standalone value is the move c6, a reversed c3 Sicilian, reversed Alapin. White now has a couple of options. It's important to avoid a certain option, this one, bishop g2. After d5 and taking, white retains a playable position after d4, but the big trap to avoid is the move queen to b3. After knight f6, knight c3, black has knight c6, and this pawn grab is very dangerous after knight d4. I don't want to really get into details, just want to show the basic problem, which is that there is this threat and white has to play very unnatural moves to avoid immediate disaster. Please avoid this. This is a trap that can easily happen in a game. So what should white do after d6? The two big moves are knight f3 and d4. d4 is actually quite good. The move I've played myself quite a bit in this position. But for that very series I'm going to recommend knight f3 simply because I think it's somewhat undervalued and quite good. d4, however, is a good alternative if you dislike knight f3. Here black can play e4 and white has d5 or bishop g2, or black can take, after which some pretty sharp tactical play can arise. So knight f3 is the move I'm going to recommend, and I think that white has quite decent chances for an advantage while playing pretty interesting unconventional positions. The move d6 is not very dangerous. White can just play d4 and get a good game, or maybe knight c3 first, controlling e4. Yeah? Probably we will transpose to some old Indian, which I'm not going to cover here. It's very rare anyway, and this move order is quite exotic. So e4 is the move. We go to d4, and now black has a choice. Knight f6, bishop g2 transposes to a later video, the video that covers the other continuations after c4 e5 g3 knight f6 bishop g2. It's pure transposition. Knight b6, queen to b6, however, is a move that black can play here as a standalone option. After e3, we follow a game between John Ludwig Hammer and Arian Tari, this year played in Norway. Knight f6, knight c3, d5, queen c2. An interesting move. It has an X-ray effect on that bishop. In fact, white is threatening to take twice on d5 for a tactic on that bishop. This is why bishop d7 was played. And now I think after a3 and b4, white had a very nice position. A slight advantage, I believe. The knights are very strong here, and it's an interesting, unconventional position to play. The main move after knight d4 is of course d5. Yeah, white will capture, and now black has the choice between c takes d5 and queen d5. After c d5, we play d3 and put pressure on the center here. The most frequent choice here for black is bishop c5, but after d e4, knight e4, bishop e3, white has a pretty nice position. If we look at this, it looks like an IQP position here where black has lost time, and yeah, this is what it is. He played many pawn moves, he played knight f6, knight e4. It's a good position for white. The most frequent move after c takes is not c takes d5, but queen e5. Here we retreat to c2 and win a tempo on the queen next. Here there's a choice between queen e5 and queen h5. Queen h5 was played in the highest level game ever of this line between Vishy Arnold and Mickey Adams. Queen e5 was played a little bit later as a possible improvement, played by Giri. Yeah, we'll have a look. Bishop g2, bishop e7, and this is the game Grandelius-Giri, where Grandelius castled and played later f4. I don't like that too much. I prefer knight e3 in this position. And I think that after knight e3, black probably should play knight a6. If he castles, the move queen a4 is quite annoying, as this pawn is very tough to defend. I think black cannot defend it in a comfortable way. So knight a6 probably is stronger, being ready for queen a4 to be answered with knight c5. Yeah, and here I think that after a3, castles and b4, we get an interesting unconventional position, queen c2, bishop b2 to come. You can argue if this is equal or not. I think black is probably quite okay, but it is an interesting and very combative position that you can easily play for a win. It's not going to be a lame game. Queen h5, however, is played more frequently, and as I said, was the choice of Adams against Arnold. Knight e3 was played by Vishy, the idea being to play queen c2 and put pressure on that pawn. Yeah, bishop c5 now by Adams. The move bishop h3 is not so good because of queen b3. Quite an annoying attack on this pawn, and it cannot be defended easily, this pawn. Black has to play an uncomfortable move like b6 to do that, and after queen a4 he's still being pressurized on that pawn. The move by Adams, bishop c5, is better. Queen c2, attacking the pawn on e4 again, and in order to being able to play bishop f5, he just took this knight. F takes, and queen to e5. Bishop f5 also has been tested. Bishop g2, queen g6, queen b3. That was a game Navarra-Nisipiano. Problem here is this pawn is hanging. Nisipiano actually sacrificed it for insufficient compensation. b6, queen a3, however, was no better. Black cannot castle. Very inconvenient. Yeah, this is what Nisipiano played, but white grabbed this pawn, and I think should be better. This is an insufficient pawn sacrifice. If we go back, Queen e5 was played by Adams. Bishop g2 attacking the e4 pawn, which is covered. Castles, castles, and b3. The move b4 is also, I think, slightly better for white. But b3, Vichy's move is good. Knight b d7, bishop b2, and queen to e6, leaving that diagonal. And here, a very nice idea by Arland, rook takes f5. Rook f1, oh, I'm sorry, rook f1 also was possible, but knight takes e4 was played first. Yeah, and here white has excellent compensation for the exchange. He has got a pawn, fantastic bishop pair, yeah, both bishops are great, and he has 3 pawns in the center. That doesn't seem very dangerous at the moment with the pawns being so far back, but they will get forward later, and it's very tough to play against such a big pawn mass. The computer thinks that this position is equal, but I can absolutely assure you that it's easier to play for white, and I think you wouldn't find a human player at all who would prefer black in this position from a tactical point of view. I think white is in good shape here. Yeah, this was an overview of the rare lines after 2g3. It's quite a bunch, but it's better to have somewhat longer video that covers all the small moves instead of splitting it up into tons of 3 or 4 minute videos. So I hope you enjoyed the overview and feel confident to face those moves in the future.